welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheons. How can we beat this? What a view outside our windows. Holy moly. Let's see a little bit about future speakers. You want to come by in May because we're going to have Ron Holland here. That'll be fun. Ron Holland will be here to talk all about his book and life, Designing by the Seat of My Pants. And we're going to have anybody who's had a Ron Holland boat or sailed on a Ron Holland boat, let's see, hands up, or sailed on a Ron. Okay, come on by because we're going to have a Ron Holland little reunion. Okay, it'll be real fun. One of the guys who sailed and bought a boat from Ron Holland said, well, we need a bigger room. We're going to need a bigger boat. Well, we like that just fine. So that'll be fun. In the beginning of May, come by to see Steve Tashia. He is the chairman of the America's Cup Hall of Fame. He'll talk all about the process by which they select members to be in the America's Cup Hall of Fame and the balloting process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's a historian, an author, and an incredibly delightful guy who'll be coming out from New York City for this talk. And then on April 25th, Charlie Walther will be here to talk about how can hybrid vessels help the bluest of oceans go green. As those of us who've been paying attention know, we're in trouble in the oceans. That is to say, there's not just a Pacific gyre. There are, how many hands? 5 gyres in the world now. Gyres are created by tons and tons of junk, which now are so plentiful you can reach your hand in. And it's not just on the surface, it's a couple of feet below the surface now. And junk is coming down rivers and filling up into the ocean. And they're now killing animals underneath it. So we have to pay attention to what's happening in the ocean, because when little parts of microplastic drop to the bottom and coat the bottom of the ocean, what do you think that does to the sea life on the bottom of the ocean? That's like killing the roots and the trees on land. So it's really important, and we'll listen to Charlie talk about that. And next week, on the 18th, we have 2 all-stars in our club. Pam Healy, Olympic bronze medalist from '92. Remember, no pain, no Spain. Well, Pam will be back to talk with her cohort, and Nicole Brault. Nicole Brault is currently the 2nd-ranked match racing woman in America, and on the world stage, she's one of the greatest match racing females that have ever sailed. And the 2 of them will be here to talk all about engaging women through sailing. Our new female stars will tell us how it's done. You may not yet realize it, but we're about to do something really historic in San Francisco. That is to say, just like the U.S. ski team has an Olympic training facility in Colorado, we are about to have an Olympic and world-class training center on Treasure Island. Larry Ellison has just given his compound from Bermuda up to it, and others have been putting money in, including our own St. Francis Sailing Foundation, which is wonderful. And so we're going to have a cradle-to-grave sailing experience on Treasure Island. We can learn how to sail if you're an underprivileged kid, and you can learn how to sail rapidly and fast, and you can ultimately become, a great star. And those who know this also, sailing is the fastest track to the Ivy League in college, because sailing athletes have a higher GPA than any other collegiate athletes, higher than tennis and higher than golf, which are close. Sailors have a pretty complex game to play with. Now, a little bit about our speaker today. He's accomplished in many fields, an incredibly successful business person who served on the board of New York Stock Exchange listed companies and created a strong business of his own. And probably his most significant claim to fame, I would say, having Barbara and I celebrate our 40th year together this year. Well, guess what? We are truly youngsters, because I want to introduce Bob's wife of 60 years, 61 this June, Kathy. Kathy, please. Everybody knows humans are team players, and Bob's done an incredible job there. Now, let me see, how many people, hands please, have thought about writing a book? Let me see hands in the room, okay? Now, may I see, how many people have written a book? How many people have written 2 books? My point, exactly. Our speaker today got inspired by this book when he gave a Wednesday Yachting Luncheon talk about a decade ago and somebody came to him and said, you know, that's really such a fascinating subject. You might want to do a little bit more research and potentially write a book. He then went into an incredibly thoughtful process of researching what is in fact a fascinating book. I have read the book, and as my wife would say, Ron, the stack of books that you haven't read on your side of the bed is shrunk by a quarter of an inch just now. What happened? Why did you do that? It's true, because I, like many of us, get like 450 emails a day, and who can keep track of all the other online media to read? But I decided I want a paper book to read, and so I decided to pick up Bobby's book, and I read it, and I liked it a bunch, and I recommend it to everybody. And to make it easy, it's one of the only times we've sold a book in our bookstore, and it's available right now. And so you can go get one, and you have the author here to sign it afterwards, and I attest to the book. So now, it isn't the case that just Bob and Kathy by themselves are represented here today, because we have a few members of the McLaughlin family. And our HIP, military term, rank does have its privileges. May we ask the author's son, our chairman of the board for the St. Francis Yacht Club, Mark McLaughlin, to introduce the rest of the members of the family. Marky Mark. Great job you're doing, by the way. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah, son Ross. Well, I have my grandson Beckett. Stand up, Beckett is here. Our oldest daughter's son. He's a junior member of this fine establishment, Beckett McGregor. He's only 14, but he's catching up with Grandpa in height. So it's with particular pleasure that I welcome to the stage, and thereafter the Q&A session. And if you have a question, you have to raise your hand, and we'll bring the mic to you. Then we're going to want you to, what'd you say, Tommy? So, and we want you to stand up, of course, and be seen by our camera. Ryan Busalaki will be here to turn the camera around. And the last party I want to thank is the sort of like quantum leap. Everybody looks at businesses with interesting, inflection points. And the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, this is like my 13th year chairing it, and we're somewhere close to 700 talks now. We are the only 52-week-a-year speaking program in the yachting world, but a great thing has happened. We are finally answering the call by other yacht clubs to provide videos of our talks online. And if you look on the St. Francis website, you'll now see that we've archived 13 talks since the beginning of the year, and it's our intention to continue to archive these talks for other yacht clubs and other sailors around the world to watch. We've now got over 12,000 views of that archive on our yacht club site. So this is a way that we can spread our contribution to the yachting world to the other 1,000 more yacht clubs in this country and beyond it. So I said earlier, how many people have thought about writing a book? How many people have actually written two? Well, I can say he's written two fascinating books. Our speaker today, Bob McLaughlin. Bob.
Thank you, Ron, for a very nice introduction, and I would just like to make these comments and thank the committee. I had the opportunity to serve on this committee many, many years ago, and I know the amount of work that it takes to produce a speaker every week. And I just think they all do a great job, and we should thank them very much. Hey, I would like to introduce two of my guests here today and introduce you also to two other gentlemen who are not here but were very helpful to me in writing this book. The first gentleman is Jim Shubin. Jim Shubin is my engineer. Jim Shubin takes a 250-page, 8.5 by 11-inch manuscript, and he turns it into a book. with pictures, polishes it. I mean, he does a remarkable job. And for those of you who are thinking about writing a book, self-publishing, you should introduce yourself to Jim. The second individual is Spencer Cleveland. Spencer, please. I first met Spencer in 2014 when I gave my talk on the capture of the U-505, and I'll come back to this in a moment, but Spencer is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He served in the United States Navy for 4 years, but he not only he is the one person who really encouraged me to write this book. I mean, after he saw the presentation here, he said, you've got to put this into a book. This is a great story. So he not only reviewed my manuscript, but he introduced me or enlisted 4 of his classmates from the Naval Academy to review the book. 2 submariners and a gentleman, another retired captain who was a destroyer division commander. So it was those 3 people and Spencer really tightened up the book for me. That's the expression that I use. Those, and I should mention their names. It was Captain Pat Sullivan, who was the destroyer division commander, Captain Jack Newman, who was the submariner, and then Lieutenant Lamont Fymaster, who was also a submariner. I also want to introduce Reese James, who was my boyhood friend, introduced me to Kathy. 29 years in the United States Navy as an aviator, anti-submarine warfare. He did a remarkable job for me in reviewing the manuscript, and he did independent research, which I will relate to you here and further into the talk. And the 4th gentleman is Jerry McCormick, who is a colonel, retired colonel, Royal Australian Armored Corps, who in his retirement has become a world-renowned historian on naval warfare. And I'll get into it a little later, exactly what he did to help. He reviewed the manuscript, but he also made some very, very fine introductions for me to the Silcock family in Australia. So I have to tell you this story before I continue. In 2014, when I made the presentation here, a gentleman in Sausalito by the name of Jack Van Dam, who is the owner of California Video, put the the slide presentation together for me. And he said to me, hey, this is a great presentation, and I think we ought to video it. And I contacted Ron, and I asked Ron if we could have permission to video it. Ron talked to the lawyers, and the lawyers said, no, you cannot video it. So I came back to Jack Van Dam, and I said to him, hey, we can't video it. He said, well, look, can we at least audio it? Can we get an audio version? So I came back to Ron, and Ron got clearance to do an audio. And when I arrived here in, I think it was June the 4th, 2014, Jack Van Dam was already in the room setting up the audio equipment. He had a technician with him, and then he introduced me to his friend, Spencer Cleveland, who wanted to attend the lecture. I noticed that when Spencer Cleveland came up to the head table and introduced himself to me, that he was carrying a book. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was going to give me the book or whatever, but he had a book in his hand. So made the presentation. I think it was very well received. And about a week later, Jack Van Dam called me on the telephone and he said, "Bob, one of your members videoed your presentation." And he gave me his business card, and I have that video, and I've enhanced it to a certain degree. And he said, "I'd like you to stop by the studio and take a look at it." So I stopped by the studio, and I have to tell you, there were shots from Bob from the right. There were shots from Bob right head on. Every slide that we put up was shown in the video, and it worked very, very smoothly. And about halfway through, I said, "Stop." I said, "This is BS. Nobody gave this to you." I said, "What did you do?" Well, the technician, Jack himself, and Cleveland had video cameras inside the books. And they videoed the whole thing. And that's the first time I've ever told that story. And today, we're really show business. I mean, we've come a long way. Hey, this is a unique story. Probably one of the most unique stories that came out of the Battle of the Atlantic was the capture of the German U-boat, the U-505. Now, what I'm going to present to you is I'm going to introduce you to heroes. I'm going to describe some events. They might not be in they will not be in chronological order, but I'll try to bring you up to date as to where I'm going and as far as the timeline goes. Hey, the Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous battle in World War II. The book follows the commands of Captain Gallery in his command of the PBY squadrons in the Fleet Air Base in Reykjavik, Iceland, and then he was transferred to be the commander of Hunter Killer Task Group 22.3. From the German side, we cover all 9 patrols of the U-505, and we do that through the experiences of Hans Gobler, who was a seaman on the U-505. He sailed on all 9 combat patrols, and he wrote a book entitled Steel Boat, Iron Hearts. In preparing not only for my talk, but for the subsequent writing of this book, oh, God.
Lawyers calling about the video.
Yeah. I hope no one comes in with handcuffs. As I did the research, what you find is more and more heroes who just emerge from all this research. And I found myself falling to the rear of an ever-expanding column of heroes. They included admirals, flight sergeants, ordinary seamen, geniuses, high school dropouts, farm boys and shoe clerks who had never had the smell of salt air. In the French resistance, there were welders who risked their lives in repairing these German U-boats, and their unique technique was to take a break in the pressure hull, and they would fill it with oil-soaked rope and then pour solder over it so it looked like it was a weld. And when the German submarines went out of the harbor at Lorient, they'd get out to the 200-meter depth line, and they'd do their test dive. As soon as they did their test dive, water was pouring in through the pressure hull. And in the case of the U-505, combat missions or combat patrols, 4, 5, and 6 had to be aborted. They had to come back into port because they were taking on water. This is Hans Gobler. I put him in the classification of genius. He taught himself English while he was on the submarines. He, as I told you, he made all 9 patrols, and he really describes life on the U-505 as being absolutely miserable. There was no water available for laundry or washing yourself. These patrols were 3-month patrols. They used the concept of hot bunking. So when one crew member got up, another one who came off duty went into the bunk. And he described that when they returned from these patrols, they would have to burn the mattresses and burn the blankets. The toilet facilities consisted of 2 buckets located between the 2 diesel engines. The stench from the buckets and the fumes from the diesel engines made the engine room just a deplorable place to work, let alone use the toilet facilities. It was, in his words, repulsive. Interesting person in that after his retirement, he returned to Germany after the war. He was a prisoner of war. Returned to Germany, raised a family, and when he retired, he moves to Chicago to be with his beloved ship, the U-505, which is on exhibit at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. The U-505 will have 3 skippers. This is the first skipper, Axel Lowell. He was a great leader, a great submarine commander, did a fantastic job. And he organized chess tournaments, bridge tournaments, to keep his crew happy, and was just focused on the crew. This is a picture of sunbathing, which he organized whenever they were in either the South Atlantic or the Caribbean, or perhaps sometimes in the North Atlantic. In the summer, he could do this. This was early in the war, 1941, 1942. By 1943, the Allies had achieved such a superior position that the German submarines could not spend much time at all on the surface. And this was a very rare event. The second commander was Peter Zichek. Peter Zichek was a graduate of the German Navy military or Naval Academy. He was 24 years old when they gave him the command. His previous experience had been a watch officer on a distinguished submarine. But he was a know-it-all. He was a very perversive person. He was openly critical of his officers that worked for him, reprimanded crew members, took away furlough days for the absolute minor instructions. The crew hated him. On patrol number 7, they had the U-505 came under a severe depth charge attack, and Zicek cracked mentally, and he walked into the into the control room, put a revolver to his head, and committed suicide. He didn't have the courtesy to do it in the privacy of his own cabin. Harold Lang was very carefully chosen by the Kriegsmarine to be the final skipper. The morale was bad. It was almost to the point of mutiny. The crew was very, very unhappy that the experience they had with Zicek, and that Zicek would check out, so to speak, when they were in some of the deepest trouble they had ever been in. He was a merchant mariner. He joined the Kriegsmarine when the war broke out, and he is the oldest commander of a submarine in the German Kriegsmarine during the war. I'll give you just some background now on what is a hunter-killer task group. A hunter-killer task group consisted of a jeep carrier. A jeep carrier is a merchant ship with a landing platform and a superstructure that contained the bridge and the flight operations. It's very, very small, a short, very short runway for landing or for takeoff. Their classification was CVE. And the crews identified the CVE as being combustible, vulnerable, and expendable. It weighed 8,000 tons versus a CV, which was a fleet carrier. Fleet carrier weighed 30,000 tons. And you have a jeep carrier weighs 8,000 tons. So in even a moderate sea, you do not have a stable platform. And I describe in the book some of the landing experiences of trying to recover 8 aircraft after a mission. It was very horrible, horrifying kinds of experiences. In addition to the jeep carrier, there were 4 to 5 destroyers or destroyer escorts. And the aircraft were the hunters, and the destroyers were the killers. The role of a hunter-killer task group was not to escort a convoy. We'll get to Ultra, but Ultra was the British code word for any of the German codes, messages that they had broken. But Ultra would have informed these hunter-killer task groups where there were concentrations of German submarines. And they would go out to that area, and they would hunt them and kill them. And they would pursue them until they killed them or severely damaged them. The killers worked in pairs. There was an attack boat, attack destroyer that would drop the depth charges. Depth charge exploding under the sea just creates tremendous chaos with sound. And the sonar operators on the attack destroyers could not, there would be an interruption in their contact with the target. And the German U-boat commanders used to use that time to evade the attacking destroyers. Well, the tracker was about 200 to 300 yards off the stern of the attacking destroyer, would be able to track the submarine, and they would communicate to the attacker what the course change was necessary to stay right on top of the submarine. This is Daniel Gallery's family. Born in Chicago, he was the oldest of 6 children. He graduates. Daniel Gallery graduated from the Naval Academy, class of 20. He will retire as a rear admiral. His brother Philip, which is there on the far left, also he's in a midshipman's uniform in this picture. He graduates from the United States Naval Academy, and he too will retire as a rear admiral. Standing next to him is John. John will become a Catholic priest. He will serve in the United States Navy in World War II as a chaplain. And next to him is William. William is in a midshipman's uniform. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy. He too will retire as a rear admiral. It's quite unique that one family will send 3 sons to the Naval Academy and have each one of them retire as rear admirals. Gallery becomes in January of 1942. He becomes the commanding officer of Fleet Air Base in Reykjavik, Iceland. He has 2 squadrons of PBYs. It's an amphibious boat. They are equipped with what I'll refer to as the Mark II radar. And the pilots describe that radar as next to worthless. They can't pick up a U-boat with it. So there is no night reconnaissance or patrols. And of course, at night is when the German submarines will surface to recharge their battery and to ventilate the boat. As the commanding officer, when he becomes the commanding officer of Hunter Killer Task Group 22.3, he is very frustrated that they can't perform carrier landings at night. It is just considered to be extremely dangerous. But he has a very strong desire to do this, and he is an innovator. He pushes the envelope. So what he does is that he takes out the bomb racks in his Avenger aircraft and installs fuel tanks. And he can provide enough fuel that the Avengers can stay aloft for 12 hours. So he launches his Avengers at sunset and recovers them at sunrise. And it works. It absolutely worked. I mean, they have the only armament they have is a 50 caliber machine guns. All right, but if they can pick up, by this time they have the Mark III radar, they can pick up a position of a submarine on the surface. They dive, strafe the boat, cause it to submerge, and then they drop a sonar buoy, which transmits its position. They alert the task group. They dispatch 2 destroyers. They head for the sonar. Now, those German submarines, when they're up there on that surface recharging their batteries, it takes hours to do this. So they're below the surface, and they have a depleted battery. They're not going very far. And the Avenger keeps circling, and they surface again to try to recharge, and they repeat the same performance. The destroyers are getting closer. They've got a better mark now with another sonar buoy that's in the water. And eventually, the destroyers arrive, and they attack the submarine and kill the submarine. He also pushes the carrier landings. He figures that he called them lads, and he said, "You lads can do this by moonlight. You don't need a lit up deck." And he has them practice doing moonlight landings, takeoffs and landings, and they're successful. And he's able to have eventually continuous airborne surveillance for submarines. So that's the background on the hunter-killer task groups. Now I want to talk, I should show you this. This is one of the PBYs that he had in his squadrons. They had a safety range of about 2,000 miles. A routine patrol in the summer in the north, up around Iceland, when they had 16 to 23 hours of daylight. They would go out 5 hours. They'd stay with a convoy for 4 hours, and then they'd fly back for 5 hours. The other thing that I will show you that this had to do with a story. This is a silhouette recognition form for a PBY Catalina. I had a story in my original presentation, which I just had to take out. It took 11 minutes, and we'd be here for dinner if I kept that in. So I had to take it out, but it's a very unusual, heartwarming story about the sinking of a submarine, and I wasn't prepared for that laughter yet. But the story involves a Lieutenant Robert Hopgood, who finds a German submarine on the surface, and he comes in at 500 feet. I mean, he's on the deck, and in his flight operations report, he said that one of the watch people, or the watch officer on the conning tower, thought it was a German plane coming in and was waving, and he dropped depth charge directly on the deck and just blew the hell out of it. And I came to the conclusion that the watch officer had slept through the class on the Allied aircraft recognition silhouettes. All right. I want to talk about Ultra, the designation that British military intelligence put on all the information they got from the encrypting of the German Enigma codes. It's a very, very complex machine, and the British and the French had never been able to break the codes. You have to give credit to three Polish mathematicians who actually broke actually broke the German codes in 1932, and they had built replicas of the Enigma machines. They were, and I have to look at my notes here because my Polish is my third language, Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosicki, and Henry Zigolski. The replicas that they had built, they called bombies because whenever it would recycle, it would sound like bombs going off. So they called it the bombi. The British, by the summer of 1939, began to recruit mathematicians. And probably the most prominent mathematician that they recruited was Alan Turing, who was teaching mathematics at Cambridge University. Turing took on the assignment of breaking the Kriegsmarine code. It was the most complex of all the German codes. And the Germans also had a separate code for longitude and latitude positions. None of that was available to MI6. The first thing that Alan Turing did was to enhance, I should just back up for a moment and tell you that the Polish government, fearing invasion by the Germans in, let's say, July of 1939, invited the French and British intelligence to come to Warsaw to view what they had. And they were astonished to find out the progress that the Poles had made. And the Polish government gave them the codes that they had broken and the replicas of the machines. So Turing had one of the Polish bombies, and he began to enhance that bombi machine. In May of 1945, when the war is concluded, there were 200 Turing machines working in Bletchley Park, which was the location of where they had their deciphering operations. Bletchley Park employed 10,000 people, and they were reading 4,000 German messages a day. And most of this work was being done by women in the Women's Royal Naval Service, which were referred to as Wrens. They did a remarkable job. All right, we're going to move. We're going to move to June the 4th, 1944, and this is when they captured the U-505. They were 150 miles west of Cape Blanco in French West Africa. The U-505 had been on station for 60 days. They had made no contact with any Allied shipping, and Lang advised Lorraine, their base, that they were terminating the mission on May the 31st and returning to Lorraine. Now, Ultra intercepts this message, and they send a message to Gallery, Hunter Killer Task Group 22.3, that there is a submarine returning to Lorraine. He's in the general area. He's been there for 3 weeks. He's running low on fuel, and he sets course for Casablanca to go and refuel. Now, Gallery figures he's on the same course with this submarine to get around the Horn of Africa. One, he was going to Casablanca, the other one was going in the Bay of Biscay to Lorraine, France. Now, it is a fascinating read to read Gallery's book, and I share this with the reader in the U-505. But Gowrie, after the war, is using his own logbooks and the logbooks of the U-505. And from May the 15th until June the 4th, he is plotting the position of each one of these boats. And he can never find them. And although they're picking up all kinds of sonar noises of engines, radio transmissions, he knows he's close, but he hasn't found him yet. Now, on June the 4th, at 1100 hours, Gowrie is sitting on this bridge in his chair, having a cup of coffee, when over the PA system comes that the Chatelaine, a destroyer, has made sonar contact with a submarine. Gowrie leaped to his feet, gives the command, left full rudder, engines ahead full, grabs the ship mic and transmits to Commander Hall, who is commander of the destroyers, that I'm maneuvering clear, it's your show, good luck. And then he grabs the next mic for the air operations and commands them to launch 2 Avengers to assist in the attack. This is the U-505 and this in the permanent exhibit in the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry. And you can see that because of the space, the conning tower is taken off the submarine. It is on the exhibit floor. There are all kinds of interactive kinds of exhibits, a lot of displays, and a lot of photographs also. Hey, I was here I visited this in 2012. I came away with a very keen sense of respect for a Lieutenant J.G. Albert David, who will led the 7-man boarding party aboard the sinking U-505. And at the time, he was a lieutenant, I didn't look that closely to his picture, and I just assumed that Lieutenant J.G. was about 24 years of age. Had been promoted after I think he got a promotion after 18 months. They were promoted from lieutenant to Lieutenant J.G. What I found out when I started to do research on David is that he joined the Navy when he was 17 years old. He retired after 20 years at age 39. And that was in August of 1939. All right, so Germany invades Poland on September 1st of 1939. That's beginning of the Second World War. The United States Navy begins to call up their reserves, and he's called up in late September. He enjoyed 47 days of retirement. All right. Excuse me, I should have shown you this slide. This is Lieutenant David. And this is Lieutenant David and his boarding party on the conning tower of the U-505. The ship is probably 10 degrees under by the stern. It is likely that demolition charges would have been set to scuttle the boat. And if demolition charges weren't set, it is highly likely that there may be armed German sailors on board who are intent on repelling boarders. The rudder is jammed to the right. It's operating in tight circles to starboard. The diesel engines are both operating, and it is proceeding at 7 knots in tight circles. Albert and 2 seamen descend down the ladders from the bridge to the conning tower, and then the conning tower into the control room. And they're coming down these ladders backwards. They have Thompson submachine guns strapped over their shoulders. They are sitting ducks if anybody is down there waiting to repel boarders. Okay, they first go to the radio room. They're fully equipped to take over a submarine. They've seen to that. They've been practicing this for some time. They force open the locker. They bag the code books, the Enigma machine, and they hoist it up, and it's put in the whaleboat. They locate 14 demolition charges, and none have been armed. So Gobler was the last German seaman to exit the boat, to abandon the ship. As he's ascending the ladder up to the bridge, he remembers that there's a sea strainer in the control room, and that if he opens that sea strainer, the water is going to come pouring in. So he goes down, he opens up the sea strainer, and drops the cover right next to the sea strainer. Now, one of the sailors that comes in, and there's water pouring into the boat, and one of the sailors sees the cover, puts the cover back on, stops the flow of water. Now, there is
That's a Bravo right there. That's amazing. The heroism to go aboard the sub, which he believes could blow up or sink, goes down to the deepest part, puts his cover on. He basically kept the sub from sinking with his base.
Right. Absolutely.
That's worth applause.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is worth applause.
All right. It's another fascinating story, which I can't relate here to today, as to how Commander Trocino, who was the engineering officer on the Guadalcanal, the Jeep carrier, how he made, once they secured the 505, how he made it seaworthy. In other words, the rudder was damaged. It had a lot of water after the boat. And the amazing thing about Trocino is he was a high school dropout. But he knew he was just a natural man in an engine room. And Gallery felt he could fix just about anything. And it's a remarkable story. So he makes it seaworthy and brings it to what the Navy calls full surface trim. This is a picture of the boarding party, David and his 7-man boarding party. If you'll notice closely, there are 9 people, or 9 naval personnel in the picture. The gentleman at the far right is a commissary mate. He infiltrated the celebration and had his picture taken with him. So they discover this, and they have to reassemble the group for a second shot. And this time they leave Lieutenant David out. So it took them three tries to make this work. These are just some additional photographs that I was able to obtain about the rescue. And you can see the perilous condition of that ship. There's another shot with a destroyer in the background. And this is a great shot. This is on the right. You have Lieutenant David. In the center, you have Captain Gowrie, and on the left is Commander Trocino. It's international protocol with the positioning the flags, the United States flag flying over the German Kriegsmarine ensign, I guess we would call it. This is a picture of the fleet tug of Banky towing the prize. They were instructed to take the prize to Bermuda, which was 1,700 nautical miles from the point of capture. Now we're going to go back in time again, and this is a picture of Ronald Silcock. He's a flight sergeant in the Royal Australian Air Force. Jerry McCormick, who I introduced to you at the beginning of my talk, retired colonel, Royal Australian Army, sent me 42 pages out of his personnel file, which I used in writing about this fascinating young man. Rhys James, my good boyhood friend, was doing independent research. He found that his brother, Ron Silcock's brother, Ken Silcock, had written a book entitled Two Journeys into Peril. And what it was a compilation of the letters that they had, both the brothers had sent home during the war. So I had a tremendous amount of information on Silcock. He joined the Royal Australian Air Force at the age of 27, and after extensive training, qualified in multi-engine anti-submarine warfare. When the Germans, when France surrendered, I guess would be a better way to put it, when France surrendered, the Germans got access to a French device called METOX, which was a radar warning receiver, and it would turn radar pulses into audible beeps. And particularly when an Allied aircraft operator would switch from, if he was on a 30-mile range for his radar, and he picked up a position, he could switch down, narrow it down to 9 miles. And whenever you did that, the audio beeps on the METOX machine would double in frequency. And that told the German captain, U-boat captain, I got to dive. So they were evading Allied aircraft through the use of the METOX. Silcock is credited with the procedure to void the benefits of this. When he spotted a submarine on the surface, he would instruct that the radar be turned off. He would ask for a vector to the target. He would use cloud cover to get in the vicinity of the target. Once he made visual contact, he would turn off his engines and glide to the target. Open his bomb bay doors, turn the engines on, and in Australian, the watch officer and the people on the bridge had been bushwhacked. This was on the 10th of November, 1942. It was Zajec's first patrol. And he was on station on the 1st of November in the narrow straits between Venezuela and Trinidad. And it's a target-rich area because of the oil tankers coming out of Venezuela. He was hounded by Allied aircraft on the 9th of November and had to make 6 emergency dives. He decides to relocate southeast of Trinidad. His battery is almost depleted. And on the 10th of November, 1942, he will surface southeast of Trinidad. Silcock took off on a sweep at 09:45 on the 10th of November. At 1300 hours, Gobler relates that Zizek, a watch officer, one lookout, and the operator of the antenna for the METOX machine were on the bridge, and the watch officer made the comment that to Zizek that Captain Lowell, which is the first commander, a good commander, with this low cloud cover would have 2 lookouts. We should get another lookout. And Zizek went into an absolute rage. Pointed out that he was the captain, he didn't want to hear anything about Lowell, and METOX would protect them. At 1440 hours, Silcock had been out on patrol for 5 hours, and he informed Edinburgh Field in Trinidad that he was returning to base. At 1450, his radar operator picked up the image of his submarine. He positioned the aircraft, turned off his engines, glided into the target. He had 4 depth charges. 1 was set to explode on impact, and 3 were set to explode hydrostatically in shallow water. The first one he put right on the deck, right on the aft deck of the U-505, and the other 3 were in the close proximity of the U-505. Severely damaged the U-505. Now, the impact, the destructive force of the explosion on the aft deck broke up the steel plating into very small projectiles. And the energy caused by the explosion sent those projectiles in all 4 directions. And those that were going vertically were going at a higher rate of speed than the climb of Silcock's aircraft. And the projectiles just riddled the wing, riddled the tail assembly. It lost its aerodynamic ability to climb, crashed into the sea, and there were no survivors. This is a Lockheed Corporation promotion poster. Shows a Hudson bombing a German submarine. This is the picture of the U-505 after the attack. The pressure hull had been penetrated. The ship was taking on water. A fuel tank had been ruptured. It was leaking a stream of oil. The starboard engine was so severely damaged it would never operate again. And it is an amazing story of how the German crew repaired this ship and got it back to port. It returned to Lorraine on the 12th of December, 1942. It was the most heavily damaged submarine ever to return to port, and it took 6 months to repair the damage and make it seaworthy. I dedicated the book to Flight Sergeant Ronald Silcock, Royal Australian Air Force, and his crew, P.G. Nelson, Flight Sergeant, Royal New Zealand Air Force, R. Miller, Sergeant, Royal Air Force, and W. Skinner, Sergeant, Royal Air Force, and Harold L. Drew, Seaman First Class, United States Navy, who flew with them as an observer on the 10th of November, 1942. I describe them as the most overlooked heroes in the Battle of the Atlantic. There's absolutely no recognition. And that is another story in itself. So I should tell you that my friend Rhys James, in identifying, or this book by Ron Silcock's brother, Ken, Two Journeys into Peril, that he mentioned that they had a second cousin, a Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Silcock, who had retired from the Australian Army. So I sent an email down to, I read the book, sent an email down to Australia to Jerry McCormick and asked him if he ever knew this guy. He tracked him down. At that time, Jerry had a copy of the manuscript. He gave the manuscript to Tony Silcock. Tony Silcock contacted Amanda Silcock, who is the daughter of Ken Silcock. And of course, they asked for 10 copies of the book. And I sent those 10 copies down. Here is Amanda Silcock presenting 2 copies of the book to the director of the Royal Australian Air Force Museum in Melbourne. And I'm pretty proud of that. So thank you.
Wonderful, Bobby. So welcome again to Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the St. Francis Yacht Club. Our speaker today is a member and now author of 2 books, Bob McLaughlin, Bob McLaughlin. So Bob, and I want to acknowledge, before we roll, 2 sets of folks. One is the Facebook Live broadcast would not happen were it not for the incredible talent and brain power and ingenuity of Sailing Illustrated, whose founder, Tom Eamon, is helping all the time. Thank you, Tommy. And Julia, his able co-producer, and Ryan Busalaki, who's a candidate for membership here, Sales on Youngster at the Yacht Club. And, of course, none of this could happen without the great consent, the lady who asked that we chair again the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, our Commodore, Teresa, the first female Commodore of the St. Francis Yacht Club, Teresa Brandner. Teresa. Thank you, Teresa. Let's see, Bob. So what a really, really fun book. Talk for just a moment, and I'm going to ask you so many questions. We're going to have a little short clip kind of like answers, but help me for a second. Make sure you're on here. Help me understand your childhood connections to World War II and the German activities. Give me a short recap of those. And you were a little kid, and I learned from reading the book that you were born in 1932, and congratulations, sir. I would have never guessed your seniority. And amazing, incredible accolades go to your great writing activity. It's inspiration to many of us. What was your childhood connection to World War II and the Germans?
Well, about the only connection that I had, and that I mentioned in the book, is the United States. I devoted a whole chapter to how we took care of, or the imprisonment of the POWs, and they had a good life. They had a very good life, and they did work on farms and lumber operations. I had the experience, and they were paid for that. We had to, by the Geneva Conventions, we had to pay them for that. And I point out that most of them returned to Germany with hundreds of dollars in their pockets. We did take out of their wages for housing and food, but still, they returned to Germany with several $100s. As a young boy, I was on a farm in August of, I forget the year, but I remember that I was 12 years old, and they were using German prisoners of war to harvest the crops And I was down by the fence line and standing next to a guard, and the German prisoners were harvesting and singing. And I asked the guard, what are they singing? And he said to me, they were singing Goddamn America. And
And you're what age? What age were you?
I was 12. I was 12, and I today think back on it, and I don't think he spoke German because all the German-speaking people in the army were in Germany or on the, in Europe fighting, and I think he was just trying to frighten a young boy.
Can you think of the moment when you decided, I'm going to write this book?
Well, I don't know if it was a moment, but you know, a moment can cover weeks or maybe months. But of course, Spencer Cleveland was encouraging me to write the book, and I just found myself with a lot of great pictures that I put together and notes that I put together for the talk here in 2012, and I didn't have a lot to do, and I said, I think I'll expand it into a book. And it took about a year to write the book.
What year was that?
That would have been in 16, November of 16, and I think I actually published it, printed it in December of 17.
So 13 or so months. How many hours do you think you've invested in the research and writing the book?
It's hard to say, Ron. Tremendous amount of time to research it. And, you know, every time I went in and researched something, you found somebody else that you said, got to honor this person, whether it was a man or a woman or seaman or, you know, whatever.
And what about your writing process? Did you do something daily? Did you have a schedule you wanted to keep to?
Yes. Oh, I think you have to have a schedule. You know, you have to be disciplined, or you won't get it done. You just won't get it done. And I would set aside hours in the morning, early in the morning.
What time?
Yeah.
What time?
6.
And you write until when?
6 to 10.
Now, we're going to entertain lots of questions from the audience, so if you have a question, put your hand up and we'll bring the mic to you. John Cumberpatch, only a member since 1952, as I recall, John.
51.
51, yeah, thank you. I'm always wrong on things like that, John.
I have two questions. One is, how do you compare the U-505 to the Pompanito that we're all very familiar with? And the second is this story related to the movie that was done several years ago with Matthew McConaughey leading the boarding party on the surfaced and captured German submarine?
I think the U-505 was a class of submarines. I think the Germans referred to it an X7, XII, much bigger than the Pompano. You know, I've been on the Pompano, and I've also been aboard the U-505 in Chicago, and the U-505 seemed to be much more spacious, and I think it carried over 22 torpedoes. It's quite an inventory. I'm not familiar with the movie that you mentioned.
So, could you tell us how many U-boats did the Germans have at the start of World War II, September 39, approximately?
I think it was less than 100. It was probably about no more than 75. And
their Fuhrer really wanted U-boats. How many did they have by 44 when the Germans surrendered?
Well, I recall that they built 850 during, you know, once the war broke out, they built 850, and I think we sank a total of 735.
And what was the toll of Allied shipping taken by the submarine corps, the U-boats? Do you know a sense of how many ships were sunk by the U-boats? Allied cargo and so on ships, merchant marine and navy.
I don't have that number handily available.
Because your tonnage in the book was so impressive. What's tonnage? Because in case people aren't familiar with the history, the island of Britain was having quite a hard time, producing enough material inside. So with our program from America, Lend-Lease, we started shipping material to them, but it could only be good to them if it could get to them. And the U-boats were the incredible grab that the Germans had to stop the British ability to defend themselves.
Right.
Let's see, we have another question. Yes, sir, Chris.
I'm Chris Ray. Bob, thanks very much for doing this talk again. And I recall it from back then. You've changed it in some nice ways, so thank you. Good on you. In your talk, what wasn't clear to me was at some point the Germans had had enough and decided to surface, and that wasn't exactly clear. I guess they depth charged them so badly that the pressure hull had failed, and they were either going to sink or come to the surface and surrender, which wasn't clear. I guess we took the whole crew off before guys boarded and tried to get into the boat. Is that what happened?
Okay, let me see if I can clear that up for you. Hey, I should have mentioned this, but the entire attack from the time that the destroyer found the submarine on their sonar to when it surfaced was 11 minutes. This is a very short period of time. And on the submarine, first of all, the task group just sailed right over the submarine. Gallery all the time in those few days. He thought that the submarine was south of him, and the submarine was actually north. So they sailed right over the top of it. The Germans picked up the propeller noise from the destroyer, the Chatelaine, at about the same time that the Chatelaine recognized there was a submarine there in the water. And the commander ordered the submarine up to the surface periscope depth. So he's in the conning tower. Periscope goes up. He takes a look, and he just says, "Destroyers, dive, down periscope." And he's down the ladder. What he didn't say was that he saw 3 destroyers, 2 aircraft, and an aircraft carrier. He was right square in the middle of a hunter-killer task group. Now, once they dropped the depth charges, they just really did considerable damage to that ship. To the point, they had no rudder. They were taking on water. He didn't have much choice but to surface. So he gives the orders to surface. He's the first one onto the bridge. And by now they're strafing the submarine with small arms. That was part of Gallery's plan. No more depth charges, no more heavy weapons. We just want to drive that crew off that boat so we can capture the boat. So the skipper is the first person out on the bridge. He gets hit with flying metal, shrapnel. He takes a 50 caliber round in the leg, and also had a severe head wound from shrapnel. And he's lying unconscious on the bridge. The executive officer, who was very capable, was the second man on the bridge, and he went aft to man the anti-aircraft gun to return fire. And he was so overwhelmed with small arms fire from the aircraft and the two destroyers that he had to give it up. He sought cover behind the conning tower and then just jumped into the sea. So as the crew and the standard operating procedure for arming the demolition charges to scuttle the boat, there were only 3 people who knew how to do that: the skipper, the executive officer, and the engineering officer. So the engineering officer is still below. He panics and orders the ship to abandon ship. So everybody's going up on the deck, and they confine their strafing to the aft part of the ship, and they're really driving everybody forward and into the water.
Just a quick follow-on. It's not clear. So this is the same crew. This is the same crew that had their captain shoot himself during the last depth charging.
That is correct.
Hence the 11 minutes.
Another question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, miss.
My name's Rowena Carlson. I really enjoyed this story because I worked for the Navy for 30 years as a research scientist. So
Bravo.
I'm looking forward to reading the book. I wonder, do you have any military background yourself?
I served in the United States Marine Corps in 1955 and 1957.
Right, Bobby. Good going, Bob. Thank you, miss. As I look for other questions from the audience, let me ask, the U-boats were being scuttled by the French resistance. Could you talk a little bit about how when boats were going in for repair, you mentioned the phony seam compound. What other things were happening that the French resistance was doing to scuttle and keep these boats out of work, out of commission?
Well, they were putting sand in the fuel. They were doing something else. I've forgotten just who else, what else they were doing, but it was just continuous, and the Germans just couldn't find ways to stop them, and it was all being led by a French general, if you will, who was in charge of the French workers and the construction at the U-boat base. He organized a tremendous organization. Through prostitutes, through bartenders, they knew the departure of every German submarine. That information would be relayed to the RAF in England, and they would come and strafe and bomb those submarines who. The harbor at Lorraine and the waters just off the coast aren't deep enough for them to dive, so they had to go out on the surface. And in order to counter the aircraft attacking them, they went out in groups of 5, and they had minesweepers escorting them with anti-aircraft guns. And of course, the Germans had to give up their deck guns, their 5-inch deck guns, which they would use to sink merchant ships rather than use a torpedo. They had to abandon those and adopted defensive weapons and aircraft guns to protect themselves.
Next question for the audience is our senior staff commodore and, in fact, the historian of the St. Francis Yacht Club, R.C. Keefe. R.C.
Well, Bob, I'm really proud to see you sitting up there because you and I are of the same age, almost to the year, to the month. So for you to keep all this alive is very, very important to people like me. We used to say, Captain, let's get a good man on that. And he'd say, yes, sir, right away, I'll do it myself, sir. However, did I understand you to say that one of your guests today was an AS an anti-submarine officer, or expert or what have you?
Not the guests who were in attendance here. Spencer Cleveland is a graduate of the Naval Academy, but I think he was on a destroyer. Yeah. Yeah, but hey, the principal anti-submarine warfare person was my childhood friend, Reese James, who was a naval aviator, anti-submarine warfare.
Well, I ask because I spent 5 years of my life as an ASW officer, and our job was to do this, sink submarines. It was not to serve in the submarine service. And our staff commodore, Ray Lotto, who is not here today, I don't believe, was a serving officer in the submarine service for some little time. And you may remember Shepard Jenks. Is that a name that means anything to you?
Yes.
Shepard Jenks put on, Jenks was the son of one of the staff commodores of the St. Francis Yacht Club. And he graduated, after graduating from the academy, his claim to fame in this room, he was the navigating officer when they took the Nautilus under the ice. So you're in good company. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Bob, now in the book, we realized the ultimate prize for getting and capturing U-505 was that they were able to get and capture and secure the latitude and longitude books, which then put together with what we knew from the encryption information we were getting, allowed us to get the actual location of the submarines in the German U-boat fleet. And thereafter, in the next 11 months after capturing 505, the U.S. and the Allied forces sunk 270 U-boats. What an accomplishment. Can you talk a little bit about that great piece of research that you came up with, Bobby?
Yeah, that was a major breakthrough. They had never been able to break the codes for the longitude and latitude codes, so they never knew the exact positions of the submarines or the destination for the submarines. But they could pick up the general area, and this really enhanced their ability. Ultra was directing people to the exact location of a submarine.
Paul, question from the audience. Paul Kamen.
Well, no, I have the numbers for you. Allied losses during World War II to submarines, 2,828 ships, 14,687,231 registered tons. About three-quarters of that in the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul Kamen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul Kamen. Not a surprise that our naval architect and friend of the Wednesday Outing Luncheon, Paul, would have that statistic. Now, the second really prize was that you wrote that the Germans, the Nazis, had invented a new acoustic torpedo, and these were able to follow in on and hit Allied ships with high effectiveness. And yet, after we captured the submarine, and you have to capture the submarine to bring it back and research the submarine to discover how they were doing that. Talk a little bit about the value of actually having the physical submarine, this gallant act of capturing it.
Well, I should expand on this just a little bit, and that because I think it's important. Admiral King was the chief of naval operations. And when Admiral King learned that Sink Atlantic ordered him to tow the U-505 1,700 nautical miles to Bermuda, he wanted to have Gallery court-martialed. And his logic went something like this, that if a German submarine had intercepted this transport and saw the U-505 under tow, they would have known that we had their code books and probably broken their code. And King contended that Gallery should have scuttled had to take off the Enigma machine, the code books, and so forth, and scuttled the U-505. Well, I point out in the book, well, I should say that when they got to Bermuda, they took inventory of the torpedoes, and they took the torpedoes off. They found out that these were the new German acoustic homing torpedoes, sent those to Bethesda to the Bureau of Ordnance, and the Navy was able to work out countermeasures which just neutered the capabilities of the acoustics. Now, I don't think that anybody who was aboard that submarine, and if an order was given to scuttle it, I don't think anybody would have checked, what kind of torpedoes are on board. We've got what we need, and we've got the code books, we've got the Enigma machine. Let's get the hell off this boat, all right, and blow it up, scuttle it. So we would. I think if he had scuttled the ship, they would have never had those acoustic torpedoes, and they never did court-martial gallery, but he came pretty close.
One last question. You write as well that when we broke the code by the capture of 505, the disinformation campaign by the Allied forces was so strong that every time they targeted a submarine, before attacking the submarine, they would send essentially recon planes over the scene to act like they had discovered it with the recon planes. And that effectively this kept our secret, that we were able to actually identify the location longer.
Right, that's a good observation. They did a very good job of keeping the fact that they had broken the codes. That the Germans never knew it. They never knew that the Allies were reading their mail, and that was one of the precautions that Ultra put out. That hey, and particularly not only in the naval operations, but any land operations, they would suggest that there be a flyover of a recon plane, and any survivors of the attack would say, well, we were spotted by a recon plane, rather than suspecting that they knew they were there. But I'll tell you that in the book, I outlined the fact that when Zuzek committed suicide, I think it took something like 5 days for the executive officer to elude the attacking Allied destroyers. So it wasn't for 5 days that he had the opportunity to surface, and they buried Zuzek at sea, and he radioed to Laurent that Zuzek was dead and that he was returning to base. Because the Kriegsmarine thought the submarine was lost. They hadn't heard from it in so many days. But, okay, Ultra picks up that message, and the night after they got into port, the Allied radios broadcast. There was a bar in Laurent by the name of the Red Mill, and the Allied radio broadcast in German says, all you officers in the Red Mill, you must be very surprised that Captain Zuzek did not return with his ship. Well, the Germans never put that two and two together, that the Allies had broken the code. But that was a major breach of discipline on the part of let's say the watch officer at Bletchley Park, who permitted that piece of information to be used in a propaganda kind of way. Serious breach. It should have never been. But the Germans never realized, it was never publicized until 1977 that their codes were broken. They never knew it.
So now, 70 years later, we're just learning about all the mastery with which our country, the Allied forces, conducted this warfare. Talk about one last thing. Essentially, in order to make sure the Germans didn't know that we had broken their code, they also conducted misinformation, and they basically allowed rumors to get out that America and the Allied forces had new underwater cameras with which they could detect submarines. Talk a little bit about that ingenious plot to hide the fact that we had broken their code.
Well, they would broadcast this information to supposed agents in Europe. So the message was going out about this new camera that had been developed. And the British then learned also that the Germans took that bait, and they had developed a paint that they painted the submarines so that that would look like water, and they actually spent money to
Hide from our cameras.
Yeah, hide from these cameras, which was fake news. All right. There's one other thing that they did that. I'll think of
So
it
the
later.
prompt of fake news brings us to today. And I want to thank you for attending the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Our guest speaker today has been Bob McLaughlin, author of now 2 books, including U-505, A Legion of Heroes. A great read, Bob. And with that, the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon is adjourned. Bobby, good job, buddy. Good job.